Hey friends, my name's Georgie. It is awesome to have you listening in to episode 3 of my new mini-series of the Just Breathe podcast, There Will Be Blood. A series of unapologetic conversations aiming to crush as many taboos as possible around the subject of women's health. And I truly believe that storytelling, connecting, and speaking out are the best ways to do that. In today's episode, we'll be exploring the topic of discrimination and particularly racism in the women's health sector. And I'll be chatting to the wonder of a woman that is Tobore Sonia Dafiaga. Tobore is firstly a good friend, but also an artist, a freelance producer, and a budding activist. She's a fellow for the charity Forward, who work towards tackling GBV, that's gender-based violence issues for African and Caribbean women. Tobore and I got talking on the topics of maternity care, sexual health, and Tobore's work with the charity Forward, and it was a really impactful and insightful conversation, and I hope you get as many insights from it as I did. If you haven't already, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Just Breathe podcast. Let's keep on building that strong, breathing community. Let's keep inspiring people. Let's keep empowering people through the power of the breath. All right, let's dive right into today's powerful conversation. I really hope you enjoy it. This is episode 3 of There Will Be Blood with Tobore Sonia Dafiaga. Tobore is in the house. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you, Georgie. It's so lovely to meet you in this capacity and catch up.
I know. So Tobore is a great friend of mine, and so excited to bring you on the podcast to talk about some damn important topics.
Mm-hmm.
I really, I want to chat today about women's health and discrimination and racism, how those two come into play. And of course, as we were saying before we started recording, that there's some really big subjects in the forefront right now, especially around maternity and racism. And the fact that you just told me Black women are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth. Is that correct?
Yeah, Black women are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth. In fact, there was a campaign that I think it started as of last year, and it's called 5 times more likely.
Right.
And it's what sort of spearhead, I don't know if you've seen it in the news, but Rochelle Humes, she was sort of the presenter on a documentary that was released by Dispatches. It was released on March the 29th, but I think it's still available to watch. And remind me, I can get the specific name. It's called the Black Maternity Scandal.
Cool.
And essentially, it spoke to different Black women. It tried to investigate why and what is the reason behind the statistic that has been around for a long time, I would say, but it's just as of recent years that the spotlight has been put on it because more people want the issue to be put out there because it's needed. And the voices of these Black mothers need to be heard because, I mean, there's various things that are the cause of it, but one of the forefront reasons is that due to slavery times and then just the years following on from that onto this present day, it's a stereotype that Black women are able to handle pain much better because back then and during slavery times, either like doctors would test out horrific medical procedures on the bodies of Black women and no anesthetic or anesthesia or anything would be given because we wouldn't need it.
Right.
Because of the perception,
in inverted commas, would
because of the perception of Black women, Black bodies in general, and the association with pain, people like Black women will be tested on. Even like someone called Henrietta Lacks, her cells were used, and it's popular, it's known now, but her cells were used to have a scientific breakthrough when it came to, I can't remember the exact.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
But yeah, like as in our bodies are constantly used in medical research and medical progress, but care isn't given to that procedure. It's done inhumanely, but that history has sort of fed into the narrative that we've had to deal with now in the healthcare system, that Black women don't need the attention. Black women, they carry pain more, and they're able to sustain pain more, and it feeds into the annoying saying of like, oh, you're such a strong Black woman, because
right,
it's a whole convoluted thing. But I think in all instances when it comes to Black women in health, it narrows down to the thing of Black women equals more pain threshold, which is a lie. And because of like within our community, due to everything, we've had to, Black women have had to sort of carry the family on their backs and be the strong mother and work multiple jobs, as well as, look after their family. So there's this narrative of strong Black women, but we are human. We are human. And yeah, that stereotype and that statement isn't true. And it's quite funny and sad how that has seeped its way into the healthcare system, and it's remained like an implicit bias thing of, it's a double-fold thing of like a medical professional having racial bias towards their patient, and then implicit bias about, the awareness of like Black bodies and conditions and how that affects different communities in different ways.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's all fed into it.
Yeah, and it's sort of even worse, I suppose, that this could even be an unconscious bias that's created just purely by an assumption, and so by the unconscious I mean even without even thinking, which doesn't make it any more acceptable, of course, but without even thinking, that people are jumping to this assumption that Black women can deal with pain better, because why, if we really come down to it, what, because they've had to deal with more? Because what, a white woman is more privileged, and so then she's a little more sensitive. It actually, it doesn't add up. And what's crazy about also what you just voiced there, which is so important, is how this is stuff that happened a long time ago, and stuff that has been, it's history that's been silenced.
Yeah,
the breakthrough was completely publicized, but actually the process and the suffering that was part of that breakthrough was silenced. Those women were silenced.
It was completely silenced. And that's why I say it's only in the last 2 or 3 years or so that things have been voiced more, because beforehand it was a case of, it was just accepted. It was just accepted that Black women were dying more. No one wanted to investigate into it, because why should they? Do you know what I mean? Because it's not an important demographic of society, quote unquote, in that sense. And like it's a popular saying, Black women are the most discriminated people in society. And then obviously you add layers of marginalized societies into that when it comes to trans Black women and things of that sort. But yeah, it wasn't, I think, until like Beyonce publicized her issues with the healthcare system when it came to maternity, until Serena Williams publicized her issues, until Rochelle Humes, various other people come forward. Even there was a popular British Black YouTube personality who passed away last year. Her name was Nicole Thea.
Right.
And again, it was due to the negligence in our NHS healthcare system and everything pertaining to that. And that's why Black women are 5 more times likely to die. And then it even affects East Asian women and South Asian women and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that the figure comes from the ignorance?
Oh, it's a variety of things, because it's a case of, okay, if let's say we have a situation, and let's say prior to giving birth, the Black mother would have voiced her various concerns about her health.
Yeah.
due to that implicit bias, due to negligence, it's not dealt with at a timely matter, or it's not dealt with enough importance because,
right.
oh no, you're just making it. It's because we can get into how this affects PCOS and other forms of health issues, particularly in this case. The link is that, you know what, you're over emphasizing the pain you're experiencing, or it's not that, you know, deep, and it's you're fine. And then there's also issues of like, there are specific health concerns that do affect Black women more, or do affect white women more, or different things just due to cultural influences when it comes to diet and health.
Absolutely.
But then those things aren't researched in the Black community. Just like how, for example, with sickle cell affects the African and Caribbean community more, but the healthcare, like the NHS and everything, it doesn't research, it doesn't put money and funding.
The funding isn't,
it's the funding. It really and truly, it's the funding, because I read apparently the NHS England gave an extra 95 million in funding for maternity care, but how much of that is going to be used to understand the issue of Black women and Asian women? Like, who's to know? Do you know what I mean? So
who's in charge of funding? That? Right.
Exactly. Funding, lack of resources, negligence, implicit bias, and all of the above is what feed into it.
Absolutely. And you know, it's interesting what you said about that assumption, or that negligence of you'll be fine, etc. That's already a huge problem in women's health in general. The it's all in your head assumption, or the roll of the eyes when a woman says she is suffering with her period, that no, actually women do suffer with their periods, that it's not a, oh no, she's just on her period, she's just it's hormones, all of those sayings that we hear time and time again, that actually it's really bringing to light here that if that is already a problem just for the female population in general, how much of a problem is that with the Black female population, that it's almost tripling, that, you know, they're all, especially in terms of maternity, and like we said, PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome as well, that, you know, with the maternity, they're at higher risk. And so there, of course, is more concern. And then that concern is being ignored as something that is simply all in your head. You know, how do we come through that? Like, it's
ridiculous. Like, yeah, I don't, because it's a case of, even when if we were to discuss PCOS and fibroids, like, Black women are more likely to, especially of an older age bracket, are more likely to experience hysterectomies, the removal of the uterus and everything like that, because they're more likely to get fibroids. Or even with myself, like, I have a small cyst. So my diagnosis with PCOS has been a journey. I was first diagnosed with a small cyst at 16 years old. So from the young age of 16, I've had to take contraceptive pills to help regulate my period. But over the years, I've been wanting more answers, but because of the lack of research in PCOS for women in general, before even getting into how it affects Black and Asian women, like, the doctors, all they tell you is exercise, eat healthy, take your pills.
Oh, come on, man. You know, like, and let's rewind. I mean, I did an episode a while ago with Dasha, amazing woman, who's a real women's health advocate, who talks about the detrimental effects of the pill, that the pill can have. And, you know, how, you know, and she does mention, of course, that if you are suffering with polycystic ovary syndrome, or, you know, it's quite an extreme imbalance, that sometimes it is something that you need to turn to, and that is necessary, etc. But that, you know, is it being looked into enough that is the last resort after everything else that could be considered? Or is it just a simple, easy prescription solution that they can whack on? That it's like, next, please. You know,
it's terrible, because I was taking the pill for about a number of years before I decided, no, that I feel like this is even more detrimental to my body. So I turned to plant-based diet and veganism and exercise as a way to regulate my own body. And obviously I've had my ups and downs of that, but there isn't enough research, there isn't enough funding for how endometriosis, PCOS, fibroids, and all of the above affects women. And even when it comes to Black women, as as a one person, I know so many Black women that have continually told doctors about their issues, but it's brushed off as like, oh no, it's just your period, it will regulate better, or the actual pain we're experiencing isn't taken into consideration, and the research that is needed to know. So for example, I spoke to a doctor friend of mine, and from the little that they've done in medical school, they found that the migration of, due to different diet styles, the migration of Black or Asian women from their, birth countries to Western countries, a change in diet, the stresses they have to endure from being immigrants, and all of the above contribute to the susceptibility of developing fibroids and all of the sort. But there is still not enough research into that. And again, with women, or Black women in general, I'm in a lot of pain right now. My friends have had to undergo so many surgeries to deal with endometriosis. I've known so many of my friends' mothers who have had hysterectomies due to fibroids. But again, it's just one of those things of, if you get the pill, you get a surgery, you're meant to eat healthy, keep it stepping. Like it just doesn't make sense.
Being completely generalized, and that the human body is such an intricate thing, and like you said, the stresses, the journey, it's all so connected that you're at, and do you think when that woman goes in and says she is in pain and she is suffering, that doctor actually asks her, has she been experiencing any stresses in her life? Has she been experiencing anything recently? No, and who knows, maybe you'll get the odd one that does, but this generalization, it's something has got to change, right? And of course, I must say, like, we're not dimming the NHS or doctors in any way. Of course, I want to voice that I am personally incredibly grateful for the NHS and for doctors and for the resources that we have access to, but the generalization has got to change. And in terms of the funding for the research, if the research is not being done and the people higher up do not have that knowledge, how on earth are we meant to feel safe in those people that are supposed to be a form of caregiver? It's really terrifying.
Like, I agree with you. We need the NHS. Like, we would not be, like, the NHS.
Yeah.
In Black, period. Like, we need the NHS and all the healthcare workers in all the various levels, even from like the cleaners all the way to the doctors and the nurses. Like, we need the NHS, and like you said, it's the gatekeepers, it's the people in charge of the funding, because if inevitably that trickles down into like the life of a GP or the life of a doctor, because they have to work according to the stresses that they're experiencing too. So it's like, what are the gatekeepers doing? Why is everything being monopolized in the NHS? Like, it's a whole conversation within itself. But of course, it's they can only do so much, I guess, with the resources available and things like that. And why aren't the gatekeepers making these resources available? But I do also believe and stand firm that healthcare professionals on the spectrum have the responsibility of looking within themselves as the care providers and their biases and their approach to their work ethic and all of the above. Because at the end of the day, me as a patient, I'm not meeting the gatekeeper, I'm meeting you. I'm meeting you, the healthcare
caregiver. Yeah.
And I want you to pay me attention and not see me as another statistic that you need to get out the door.
Absolutely.
I want you to hear me when I say I am in pain, when I am this, and when I am that, and also taking the cultural understanding that's needed to address patients of all backgrounds, because that's another thing in itself. But you know what I mean? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you a question? Do you, as a Black woman, when you walk into a doctor's, if you have an issue, if you don't always know, obviously, or you never know really who you're going to get, unless you're going to a private practice. If you walk in and you are greeted with a doctor who is Black, do you have a sigh of relief in there, or do you think it doesn't matter? Do you know what I mean? Is there?
I think that's such a great and funny question, because
Yeah.
it's a real thing that I feel like different people deal with in different capacities, and obviously it then addresses the things within our perceptions within ourselves. But yes, like when I go into the doctors or any healthcare place, like my sigh of relief goes like this. I see a woman, I'm instantly relieved, because I feel
Right, me too. Okay.
I'm like, woman, and they are actually going to pay attention to me, which is its own thing. And then yeah, if I do see a Black woman, it gives me another sense of relief, because I'm like, okay, there's a form of comfortability here where I can truly express how I'm feeling, and I feel like I'll be heard. But also, if I'm being honest, there's other forms of biases with that, because there have been instances where I have seen either a Black male or a Black female doctor who I can tell are from an African background rather than a Caribbean background. And because of their own biases that they hold, they treat me like as if I'm their daughter, or I'm their this, or I'm their that, and they're like either dismissive of what I'm telling them, of like, no, like it's fine, or do you know what I mean? So there's levels to it, and I feel like we're humans dealing with humans here as much as, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I guess I'm trying to articulate it. I don't want to use the word correctly, but articulate it in a way that translates properly, where I feel as if it's almost recognizing my own privilege as well, that doesn't even cross my mind when I go into a doctor's.
Oh yeah.
Who I get. Yes, I join you on that. Whereas if I'm going about my period, yes, if I get a woman, then I'm like, oh, cool. You know, it's just a natural thing. Yeah. Like, it's just easier. But I'm in a huge place of privilege, that when I go to a doctor's, it is irrelevant to me whether what race my doctor is, because I already have an assumption that I will be seen and I will be heard.
Oh, there's even another way of flipping that, is saying that there have been, and my dad's a pharmacist, my mom's a nurse, and hearing from them and their friends, and me understanding the issues in my community, is that if a white patient, or maybe sometimes Asian patient, was to go see a Black healthcare professional, there's automatically I don't think they'll be adequately able to meet my needs because of their perception of the level of intelligence, or their level of being able to address their issues. Like, for example, my dad has been a pharmacist for the past 40 plus years. He rightly owns his own pharmacies in this country, spread out in the UK. And still, for such an accomplished man, a white patient will come up to him and they'll be like, no, can I please speak to the manager? I don't want to speak to you. Or
are you serious?
Or can I please speak to the pharmacist in charge? Or can I please, you know what I mean? And he's told,
what?
Like, patients have looked at him and sidestepped him to speak to the receptionist, to be like, oh no, can I speak to someone that can actually address my issues? Because like this blatant, the thing about the UK that I love, which is contradiction to what I'm about to say, is that I feel like in America the racism is like in your face, bam, but here the racism is so convoluted. But yeah, like in those instances it's been blatant to your face, because like, do you know what I mean? And he's a professional in his own right. So that's the flip of that instance. And that's
he owns the damn place. You know what I mean?
Do you know what I mean?
I think that's what he's talking about. Yeah, there's an assumption there of inadequacy.
Yeah. There's different things concerning it. Yeah.
That is a mind blowing. And you know, it's a whole thing, isn't it, of awareness as well, of awareness that you know, and this is why conversations like these, I think, are so important, is that if I was an innocent bystander in that pharmacy, do I have the awareness to recognize that as racism? You know, in that I think it's so important that we need to understand and have an awareness that that's not acceptable. rather than taking this surface level view of like, oh no, she probably just wants to speak to someone else. Cool. There's actually no. There's something behind that, and yeah. I think that is huge. I'd love to move on to the topic, which I think is really important as we sort of go to slightly younger generations and maybe people more around our own age group, and not, of course, we're in our 20s, so not to say women don't give birth in their 20s, of course they do, but maybe at our age range and below, in terms of sort of sexual health, and that topic. Do you these things we've been talking about really translate over into the world of sexual health as well, and how young women are treated there?
Yeah. I think if I slightly sidestepped away from sexual health specifically, but sexual abuse and sexual harassment.
Oh, absolutely.
There's a way, there's like, so the charity that I'm a fellow for, called Forward, they work towards ending gender-based violence and violence against women, specifically from the African and Caribbean community. And they recently launched a study to show how when Black women or young Black women in university settings come forward that they have been sexually abused or assaulted or any of the sort, it's not, the reporting of it is not taken seriously, and there's bias when it comes to that. So if I was to even then link it back to like sexual health, like we spoke about, like it's a case of that there's a different fold of it, because it's like, one, what resources, again back to funding, are being pumped into the communities that are majority black people or young Black women, and what resources are being pumped into the education for them when it comes to sexual health. And that, to be fair, that affects marginalized communities and like specific boroughs and locations more as a whole. Like, what education is being done for them when it comes to school level,
right?
And then that starts to reflect in like higher further education and universities and things like that. But I do think that, I think from my experience, like, again, I'm within my own self, I'm privileged. Like I've grown up in a good environment, in an environment where I've had access to education and resources when I've needed it. And especially because I live in a borough that, that at various, even though it's progressed through the levels of what resources are required in school to actually teach me about sexual health and teach me about, what my body means and what does this mean when that happens, and various things of the sort. So I think that it's such a big question, a big topic, and it's like, what angle should we even address it from? Because it's at a school level, is it the resource?
I completely agree.
Yeah,
I agree. But actually, I'm really interested, seeing as you've already brought it up, about the charity Forward, because I think that actually very much links in with the sexual health, and I mean, it's all about being heard and being seen, I suppose, isn't it? All of these topics are about allowing women, any woman, to be heard and to be seen and to be taken seriously, from a place of non-judgment and non-bias. And in terms of the charity Forward, what is sort of the point of action that they take to sort of raise awareness, to make change? What are the main things they do as a charity? I'm really interested.
Yeah, so I would say their forefront target is to working towards ending female genital mutilation,
right?
Which partial or whole removal of the clitoris and the genitalia, and there's 3 different types. And they also work towards ending child marriages. And the thing is, like, when these issues are brought up, it's always seen as like it's their problem, it doesn't affect us over here in the West, or it doesn't,
that happens over there.
But the majority of FGM procedures, a lot of them happen here in England, in the UK, due to the diaspora and the many different people from various African and South Asian countries that live in the UK. It does affect us in the UK, like, and so yeah, they work towards mainly like sort of bringing awareness to that, running campaigns, and actually helping the women in these communities, both in South Asia or Africa and in the UK, like sort of leave those situations, or safely, you know, unlearn the traditions and unlearn the things that causes these harmful and deadly procedures, and educate them and provide resources for them to sort of leave that. And I feel like so apart from their two main like forefront campaigns, how I've benefited is that, so I was one out of 17 girls that was chosen to both get training in sexual health and reproductive rights, and also carry out a social action project. So I got given a small grant to carry out a social action project which addressed an issue of my choice. And I mean, I can go into that later on, but I would say how I've benefited is that through being chosen and then sort of having this life with Forward, I've learned so much about, you know, the issues that come with sexual health as a young woman, and being heard and not being heard even, and even the lack of education that I have concerning the issues, and then how to also deal with it from a cultural perspective. Issue within sexual health, and specifically women of color, is that we have to also deal with our own cultural sort of understanding and practices, and how we're meant to, because I don't know, within certain women communities within the women of color, it's like you're not meant to talk about sex, you're not meant to talk about protection, you're not meant to talk about consent, this, that, and a third, and there's so many cultural issues and understanding concerning that it sort of almost affects how I as an individual would want to go to a healthcare professional to seek advice or help, because essentially it's a taboo, it's something that I shouldn't be engaging with of any sort. So yeah, there's different layers to it, and I think what Forward are asking, and what we're all asking, is that, you know what, these issues are taken seriously, funding is given to tackling them. The reports and the statistics which are out there are taken seriously, and healthcare professionals actually do the due diligence of educating themselves of the culture that makes up the UK, of the different people that they will encounter, and use that to, you know, just ingrain that in their approach and analysis of any sexual health issue of the sort when a woman comes to them.
Yeah, that's massive, you know, and there's even talk of the way in the Western world compared to the sort of Eastern way, compared to, I sort of love looking into things like Ayurvedic medicine, which is really ancient Indian, certainly been really useful for me, and in any little health things I've certainly got along with that a lot better, because they look at the whole person, they look at the root cause, whereas in Western medicine, not really at the fault of the doctors themselves, more just at the culture of it all, and the history of how medicine began and the journey it went on, that we're looked at as machines, like cars, and that we all have the same internal system, you know, that on a very basic functional level functions in the same way. And so we all, you know, need the same fix or whatever, but that actually it's so much more complex than that, because we are living, breathing human beings that have cultures and have experiences, and that, yes, they do have an effect on our bodies, and as a result, our health. And you know, that cannot be disregarded. And I think we're getting to a point actually with this sort of, there's a lot of East meets West things kind of, I think, coming up, that I hope in 20-30 years will really rise to the surface, you know, where they'll meet, and that these other practices will not simply be labeled as alternative, but they will be integrated into classic Western medicine, to actually look at the person and give them the right, you know, to be heard. That yes, stress is a huge part of health. You know, when all these autoimmune diseases are labeled as cause unknown, it's like, well, the cause is known, isn't it? You know, it's stress, it's lifestyle, but it's things that cannot be explained mechanically, because we are not cars.
Exactly.
So much more than that.
Yeah.
So I completely agree, and I think, being heard, possibly, I mean, is just the beginning of it. And I think healthcare professionals do have a responsibility to understand their patients.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, completely. My goodness, where do we go next? I mean, I guess it'll be good to try and talk about how we can all, I was going to say do our bit, but that sounds so easy, doesn't it? It sounds like about global warming or something.
Yeah.
I can recycle, do my bit. But, what, I guess anyone listening to this, and anyone, when we get onto the topic of racism, will say, well, what can I do? How do I start in terms of educating myself, acting? Where do you think we start to really make the change? Where does that begin?
That's always a big question.
Of course, I know it's a big question.
And no one person has the full answer, but what I would say is that there are various forms of systemic issues that affect all forms of healthcare and society. And I think championing the voices of the specific people that these various things affect. So in this case, women's health, Black women's health, championing Black women's voices, and giving the space for them to also, because I think there's this thing about being a savior.
Yes, I was just gonna say.
Yeah, there's a whole thing about, because to be fair, I would say white savior, but I would just say savior in general, of like everyone would, I feel like whenever anyone comes across, so I'm speaking generally here,
of course,
any issues, we always want to be like, how can we help, how can we solve? And it's like, no, we're not all saviors, we can't be saviors. Like, we need to empower these communities and the people to actually bring about change for themselves. And if it's through funding, if it's through providing the resources, because 9 times out of 10 the answers are within the communities, is within the person. It's just about having the platform and the resources to be able to champion their voices and work with organizations that can actually, provide the statistics, that can help to sort of like propel the change and the gradual change. So I think one is putting at the forefront the survivors, the communities and the people that it specifically affects, and everyone taking that step back and letting them be, at the forefront. Secondly, I think it's education. As much as, I care about all these various forms of systemic issues, I'm still learning. I still have forms of, maybe forms of biases within myself that I'm unlearning too. And I think it's having that grace. I think the issue about social media is that everyone's getting cancelled, and everyone's getting cancelled, and everyone and it's if you tweet the wrong thing, if you say the wrong thing, you're done, you're dead. But I feel like there needs to be grace, a grace that we're humans, people make mistakes, people have prejudice, people have this, people have that, and it's having that grace of like, you made a mistake, you didn't know something, okay, now you have the responsibility to unlearn that, you have the responsibility to educate yourself, and us as a collective internet community sort of giving grace for that. I think people are too quick to cancel people and not allowing the grace for people to make mistakes. I also think funding, money, funding. I'm involved with different organizations. There's Forward, there's an organization called Sister Space who tackle the negligence and the issues when it comes to reporting domestic violence and dealing with domestic violence within the African and Caribbean society. So it's supporting people like them. It's supporting the 5 Times More Likely campaign. It's supporting through if, I mean, I think again, social media can be performative at times, but even if it is a tweet, even if it is giving £1,
Just
50,
sharing their posts, not standing on the podium yourself and going, I'm gonna scream and shout for these women.
yeah, but
let them.
if the most you can do is share a post, or if you can give 50p or whatever to these various organizations that are at the forefront, and grassroots organizations that are tackling systemic injustice and systemic racism in its various forms, support them. Yeah, like, again, educating yourself. And actually, we all, as individuals, we actually have more power than we think. If it's actually engaging with your local MP and engaging with your local body that addresses a particular issue, and actually holding them accountable. Why is this prevalent in our community? Why is this what is being done about this? Or support, do you know what I mean? Like, an individual's voice is still important as the collective voice. And I think it's a case of what hubs and what communities or what societies or whatever can you join and add your voice to that can help propagate an issue. So yeah, I would say educating ourselves, championing these voices, funding, and just for as individuals, just checking our hearts, checking our mindsets, checking our biases, and just working to be better than we were yesterday.
Yeah,
so,
and you know,
that's a short form.
Absolutely. No, and I you know, I'm so grateful for you, because it's just so powerful, and it is so needed to be voiced. And I think the most important thing for me, there's certainly the most important thing I've learned over the last few years in educating myself more about racism and discrimination, and you know, all of that is removing the ego and having grace to step back and going, actually, you know, because everyone will say, oh, I'm not a racist. I'm not racist.
Oh, God,
I've never been racist. And you're like, it's such an ugly word, isn't it? You know, it's seen as such an ugly word, and that it's that thing of having grace, removing the ego, and going, actually, you know, I may not have meant it in a malicious way, but actually that what I just said or what I just did was bias, and I need to graciously recognize that with non-judgment, with non-anger, with non-judgment, and recognize it and say, okay, actually, maybe the one thing I can do is simply recognize in myself that actually I have a bias that I didn't realize I had, and I can work on that. And if we could all work on one bias that we have that does not serve the whole in moving forward, you know, that's surely a help in itself. And sort of, I suppose, going on to the point you said about not being the savior, being the cheer, it's sort of like a race, isn't it? It's like, no, let them run the race and stay on the sidelines and cheer. You don't need to run that race for them, because it's almost like a sympathy card, isn't it? Of like, oh, that's really sad that's happening. That's really sad. And it's like, well, yeah, it is, but it's not helpful to sit there and feel sorry for someone. It's also not very empowering to sit there and say, oh, that's really sad that happened to you, Tobore. I'm really sorry. You know, that's
with whole sympathy and saviour thing, I think it's various forms, because obviously you want to be active, you want to help out, but it's like, who should be speaking when? Who should be at the forefront when? I think it's just everyone, and specifically, you know, people that have I would say, I was going to say something else, but I won't. But it's a case of like, who is speaking when?
Yeah.
And who is being championed when? And I think it's just analysing that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know, yeah, I think you've put it brilliantly in terms of giving those women a voice and not overpowering their voice with your passion to do something and make a change, and that it's coming together as a collective, I suppose, and being really humble in terms of, it's almost like, I love the practice of Zen, approaching everything from a beginner's mind. from that I know nothing, teach me. You know, I mean, it's tough too, because when I say I know nothing, teach me, people of course need to be taking responsibility to learn themselves. But when they're listening maybe to someone talk about race, to listen from that open mind of non-assumption of that there's always something to learn here.
Definitely.
Yeah. Oh, Tobore, you are a light.
Oh, thank you, Georgie. This has been absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's been wicked, honestly. And of course, I'll put all the links to Forward and everything else, anything else that's sort of come up that's really, really relevant in the show notes, so that people can just scroll down and click on all the references that we've mentioned of those charities and those foundations that you can support. As such, any mic drop points to finish on?
Mic drop points.
Do you have a mic drop?
Oh no! Oh, I wish if you had told me before, I would have prepped one, Georgie.
No, but like, you know, I don't know. Is there what if there was one thing you most wanted to see in the next 5 years in this world? What would it be?
Oh my god, that's like more huge than what we've been discussing the whole time. A really good question. That's a really good question. I would want to see, there's so many ways I can go with this, but I would want to see the institutions, education, health, this, that, and the third, to actually take, like, with all the research they've been doing over the past years, actually do something with it, actually put funding into it, and for once just make progress, rather than always talking about it and holding committees and panels about things like that. Actually, can we see something being done and be like, and recognize and celebrate it collectively? So I will chicken out and give that answer, because it's such a huge answer, and I would sit here for 30 minutes thinking about it first. But all these institutions that do have the power to do something with it.
Mic drop. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I think that's an amazing way to finish the episode. Thank you so much. It's been wicked.
It's been absolutely amazing. Thank you, Georgie.
Thank you.